Okay, I'm just going to repeat myself. So welcome again to today's session, which is the last in our series of Accelerator Impact Measurement. We kicked off in March, so it's been about 6 months. And yes, today is a bit of a synthesis session. First and foremost, we're definitely going to have space for everyone to bring up any feedback, any questions, any comments, any challenges of where you're at. And I've also just put together a few slides to just bring the theme together and to do a bit of a recap. So as always, when you're not speaking, please put yourself on mute. I am recording the call because there's a number of folks who tend to catch up after, so it will be available in case you missed anything and want to look back in. And before we get into our recap then, this is an open period for anyone who's on the call. And I think Abby and Fikri, I might ask you both to share a little bit, because Abby, as you were just mentioning, one of the things that has been a mini project, let's say, over the course of this theme is, of course, the support that Impact Hub Phnom Penh has been getting from Spring and other partners, with part of that including some bespoke advisory on impact measurement. And I thought it would be great if you can share a little bit of where you guys are at. You just mentioned before we started recording the call that you ran one of your mini workshops. So I think just for the benefit of the group, if you can provide some context, maybe walk us through, what the sessions are about and how you've been able to leverage what's happened in both themes around impact to really help you shape what you're doing with the team. And then Fikri, for yourself, I know that you've emailed me offline about how to get started on really embedding an impact framework with your ventures, and the effort or sometimes the trade-off as well. So we'll get to that in a second. So maybe just think a little bit about the questions that you had asked over email, but I'm going to hand it over to Abby to share a little bit. And then if you guys have any other questions, just bring them forward. So Abby, over to you. You can take yourself off mute.
Cool, thank you. So yeah, I guess it kind of, so we'd already had something kind of in place in terms for our impact measurement that was done, I guess, over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. So we went through the whole process of like building out a theory of change and then deciding what metrics, what outcomes and what metrics we wanted to start measuring, and we've been doing that. But because quite a bit of time has passed now, and then also the team have been focusing on building out this 3-year strategy, which kind of led us to kind of feel that we need to update both the impact measurement that we're doing, but also discuss as a team like what we think, what our outcomes are, and whether we feel like the activities we're currently running within the mini activities that we're currently running within each of our main offerings achieve those outcomes, because this is like an opportunity now to be introducing either new things or stopping things, because we're at this point where we're discussing the next 3 years and what we want to do next. So that's prompted us to run a series of workshops on each of the core activities that we have at Impact Hub. So over the kind of 2 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks from like last week, I did like an introductory workshop where it was just more kind of sharing what I've learned through being on these calls and being on calls as well with Clemmy about impact measurement and management, and particularly applied to Accelerator. So it was sharing some of that, and then having a discussion around what we felt were the really challenging parts of impact measurement for us as an organization. So we talked about things like, how do you measure something like entrepreneurial mindset, and how do you measure something like the size or the strength of a community? How do you keep track of the connections that you're making with people, like, are these realistic things for us to be measuring? So it was just more of an interesting discussion around those particularly challenging areas. So for me, that was like the best part of what we did yesterday. And then now, after kind of setting that as like the baseline, we are having 1 hour workshops on each of the specific activities. So we've just had one today about Hub Entrepreneurs Club, which is our alumni program. We'll have one tomorrow on more of our kind of cyclical programs. We'll do one on our online communications, our online platform, etc. So spending some time as a team to focus on each of them. And then once we have a kind of a logic framework or a theory of change or whatever you want to call ready for each one, we can start using that to kind of loop back to the activities and decide if what we're currently doing should continue or what changes we want to make moving forward. So that's how it's linking into the strategy stuff as well. And yeah, so far it's been good. I think like by having a logic framework on breaking it down into these different activities means that we've gone into a lot more depth. And I can already see we've only done one, but like it's very different. It covers a lot more than what we had before. So it should be a very useful exercise and something that maybe we can also even share with particular people that we might want to partner with around specific segments of what we're doing. So like the Hub Entrepreneurs Club is a good example that we might have partnerships purely focusing on that one activity that we do, in which case it will be a good like tool to have those conversations. Yeah, so that's kind of an ongoing process, and we're aiming to have that finished by late September.
Cool. Great, thank you for sharing. I do have some questions to maybe spur some conversation. And so the first is, how many years has Impact Hub Phnom Penh been around?
We have been around 4 years.
Okay. And
4 or 5.
The framework that you had built was, let's say, about 2.5 years in. You were about 2 or 3 years old when?
Yes. Hold on, sorry. I think 3 years.
3 years, okay. And now that you're at this place and you have kind of started to revise things, etc., do you and the team feel that the business has changed a lot since when you first did it? Like what was that experience like for you, doing it before by yourself and then doing it with the team in light of either different activities or the different strategy? Maybe walk us through that.
Yeah, I guess when I did it almost 2 years ago, it was just much more, because we didn't have anything in place already, it was fine that it was a bit more of a simple approach, and that, you know, if we were going to start doing impact measurement, like something is better than nothing, but also we were really focusing on our programs and not so worried about measuring and reporting on the other things that we were doing, because programs was what we had partners for and funding for, and was also, I guess, a bigger part of what we were doing. Whereas like things like the Hub Entrepreneurs Club, the online platform, having more strategic communications, those are things that have built up over the last 2 years. So some of them are completely new. So we didn't have anything because they're just new things. And then some of them have just grown in importance. And yeah, sorry, my sound has gone weird. Grown in importance. So now it feels like it's worth starting to monitor it, because either we are starting to get funding for it or we would like to get funding for it in the future.
Yeah. And maybe just on that point, for the other two people on the call, Moon and Fikri, and of course anybody else who will be listening in later, I think the approach of kind of as an accelerator to focus on programs and outputs is the first layer of starting to talk about your impact. It's not deep, we're aware of that. It's not really focused as much on outcomes or the ultimate impact that you're having, But in general, most of us have enough data to at least talk about the output. So that is the first go-to. And then, as Abby mentioned, it's just about getting deeper. The other thing I'm curious about, Abby, for you is, like, this is something that you had started to do by yourself 2 years ago, but now you're properly engaging the team. What was it like for the team? Did they find it challenging to grasp how it all works, or was it exciting for them to understand? Just maybe tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so I mean, with the preparing for the workshops, I really used the work that we did with Clemmy, which was kind of supposed to be more applied, I guess, to entrepreneurs we work with, but the structure of her facilitation was still really useful. So I basically just followed that structure. And then within our team, like, some people are very familiar with theories of change, and some people were not at all, and it was completely new. But I think it was a nice way to structure the information that is pretty easy to grasp and pick up quickly. But it's quite normal for us as a team to run these kind of workshops, whether it's thinking about, like, what should we do with the space, or like, what's our strategy, or so we have done a lot of work together as a team, and a lot of brainstorming and post-it note writing and that. So all of that is very familiar to everyone, which means you can kind of just get straight into it. So yeah, but I think it feels maybe too early to say, like, how beneficial it would feel for other people. I can see that it's going to be beneficial for me, and for hopefully for the strategy as well, when it comes to, like, figuring out how to improve the impact measurement, because this is not all stuff I would have sat down by myself and thought of, and it is really important to, like, get everyone's input into it. But yeah, I think hopefully it's just still fun for everyone to.
Yeah, no, and one of the reasons I'm asking that about the individual versus the team experiences, because in a lot of cases, it's just, it's metrics and impact. It's one person's responsibility. But as we've talked about in this theme, and also in our venture theme, like, it's doing a theory of change and, like, really understanding the ultimate impact that you're looking to create. It's a very strategic tool, and really, to your point, helps you in some ways kind of work back and figure out, is what you're doing allowing you to achieve the change that you're looking to have? And so having the different voices at the table from the team is essential. And it's good to hear that people are also at different levels, and so you have an opportunity to bring them into the conversation. And Clemmy, you're not on the call, but shout out to you and to the Akina team for great delivery of all the tools and framework in that venture theme, because I think that the approach, and even so the approach on the content, but then also on how to deliver it, is essential. And for anybody who hasn't yet done something like this with their team, or is thinking about adding an impact module to content, highly recommend reviewing all the recordings from the Akina Venture Impact theme to really just get up to speed and get some inspiration. Thank you so much for sharing, Abby. Fikri, I don't know if you're able to take yourself off mute, but I just wanted to address the question that you had raised over email. So if you are, basically as context, you had asked over email about, in some ways, like, how do you manage when you, as an accelerator, you're trying to increase the level of impact measurement and management, but you're also working with fairly young teams that are have different priorities, or they're, full speed ahead on running the business. How much can you as accelerators lean in? But if you can take yourself off mute and want to add to that and maybe give us an update on where you are, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think, like, following up in the email, it's already quite clear. Thank you to your answer, Sana. Reflecting back on the our bootcamp, Currently, we are trying to integrate more impact management and measurement at the bootcamp process. So once they become an alumni or joining the next phase from the bootcamp, they won't be so shocked or uh, so and they don't hate doing the impact measurement. I think that that's quite clear. It's when I evaluate back uh, the Latifa that I told you in the story, the
Yeah.
email, actually it's like the alumni from our bootcamp who the previous bootcamp before we get in touch with you guys in the frontier. So yeah, like it's like the previous bootcamp who haven't been integrated with so a better impact measurement model.
Yeah.
I think that that's better answer. I think.
Yeah. And do you have any current, you and Moon, I see, is on the call too. Do you guys have any other challenges or questions as you start to, put in place that new impact module, or anything that we can help you with today?
Yeah. Actually, like this couple past weeks, I'm trying to get and read much more many references, impact report from other ventures or some kind of foundation, and I also try to watch the webinar from SOPEC,
Yep.
the software that try to
Yep.
standardize and help us to do impact report.
Yeah.
I saw them. It's like so many different kind of impact report, and they have so many different standards. And in the webinar of SOPAC that I watched, I see that some people can adjust their standard of trying to communicate the impact based on who they want to approach. So like in case if you want to approach this impact investor X, I don't know. Yeah, you try to get based on their own standard. While if you want to maybe approach some kind like UN or foundation government, maybe you approach it with more SDG standard. And from there, I'm curious about how we, as an accelerator, try to guide our ventures. Like in our case, this week we will start the new bootcamp modules that I've been talk about, that the impact measurement improvement. And but I still have kind of some concern about when we try to facilitate the ventures at the very first stage, defining their outcomes and try to set the outcome that they want to accomplish. Do we kind of direct them to type of standards that already there, like because like when I see some kind of impact report that follows some kind of standards from Gene or some even more, like I found some impact report from a foundation that help kids reducing drugs abuse. Their outcome is so scientific, they use like very thorough research that like, oh man, I don't know, even like early stage business can do that,
Yeah.
But I from the story of the foundation itself, I read their impact report too.
Yeah.
It actually works. Like when they do the impact report or the standard of outcomes they said is quite high. Yeah, they get grants from foundation. They can do the communicate the impact well, or I could say like they can sell their impact. So like that's kind of maybe like a concern to me, like as an accelerator, like what do you think about do we just direct our ventures at the early stage uh, to get in phase with the standards that is around, like the gene or maybe some research out there? Or do we just let facilitate them to define outcome based by their current output? So like just in case like many of our previous bootcamp, there's many in Indonesia who do craft business product itself. they want to empower their workers, especially like many of the case it's like women. So they create shoes or dress that by rural women,
Yeah.
and they try to make the outcome of their business is like the increasing financial stability or increasing revenue for the woman who made
Yeah.
those products, their workers. Um, but like when I compare to the standard of other impact report, that basic outcome of increasing financial, it's like so much far away, the standard of, I don't know, like when I see the report from that, like the example of foundation, right? They use such a very extensive research. So yeah, that's the concern that I have. So like, do we facilitate them and just let them do the outcome that is very so basic, that is according to their output, or at the very start we try to direct them even slowly the standard that many impact report has currently.
Sure. I'm going to share some thoughts, and then Abby, if you have anything to add, feel free as well from your own experience at Impact Hub. So Fikri, first of all, thank you for the question. And just to repeat it for the recording, the question is, when we are supporting our ventures to measure and manage their impact, do we point them in the direction of existing standards, or is there a need for some of this standardization of outcomes, or do we keep it simpler and just get them to think about their outputs and then have outcomes? And I think part of what you have also described is kind of the state of impact measurement to an extent, right? And so a little bit of storytelling here. So when I first started to look at this this world of impact for Spring, and you look at the different, similarly like doing some research, looking at what's out there, it looks like alphabet soup, right? Because there's IRIS and GIN and IMP and this, and there's all of these acronyms. It can be quite overwhelming and just a lot to take in. I think what has, at least in my opinion, what has really changed in the last couple of years is, first of all, we have the on the one hand, we have the impact management project, which is something that we've had a chance to talk about and had a speaker from in our session, and also that Clemmy referred to in the venture theme. And the thing that I appreciate about the IMP and the 5 dimensions is that it is a global consensus, because it's come from over 2,000 practitioners, on what it means to define one's impact. So those 5 dimensions of what, who, how much, contribution, and risk, it takes away some of the guesswork about how do we define our impact. So I think when we are supporting our ventures, if we can, as a starting point, get them to think about how they can map out their impact along those 5 dimensions. And it's just, again, it's a framework, but that's common language that is widely used today. At the same time, I think the confusion also comes because you have entrepreneurs on one side, you have investors, you have nonprofits, you have other funders. And exactly as you pointed, Fikri, there's like different language. And once we look at the slides that I prepared, I put down snapshots of a few different impact reports that highlights exactly that point that you're making, that it's very, very different, right? So the way that one organization talks and measures its impact looks very different than from another organization. And, the fact is that the way that different orgs talk about their impact is really defined by what story they're trying to tell as well. So I think when it comes to certain nonprofits, there's different funders that they report to. accelerators as well have their own models. So I think that we have to keep in, especially when we're reading impact reports, that's the context to keep in mind, is that this is being delivered as a narrative, as a way of pitching, I don't want to say selling your impact, but as a way of telling your story, right? And so take that with a grain of salt. When it comes to the actual outcomes that you're talking about, you're absolutely right. Again, I've seen a wide spectrum. I've seen very simple, from just, improved, let's say, mentorship, or improved access to networks, versus those sectors that are so specific where we would be able, to pick up a more scientific metric. So for example, a business that is working on reducing childhood diabetes, they're able to get very scientific in the outcome. So basically to show the improvement in the glucose levels for those kids. But that's very, very specific. I would say, in my opinion, and from my experience as a best practice, it is helpful as a sanity check to look at the IRIS metrics, because that's quite a wide taxonomy of different metrics. But the issue with some of these metrics is that they're not necessarily, if you went in, for example, to look for metrics that an accelerator would be able to use to report its outcomes, you would not necessarily be able to find that in the taxonomy. So you might have to look for something that's close, but it's more like a sanity check, I would say, just to make sure. The one thing you mentioned with regards to more gender outcomes, I'd say there's a few places. So definitely, and in case, I'm just gonna open IRIS Plus. Sorry guys, I just want to. So if you haven't yet taken a peek at IRIS Plus, this is the upgraded sort of website that the GIN has come up with. You just have to create an account. You can log in, and then you can go and select and look at metrics in different areas. I will, one second, I'm just going to log in.
I've already signed up to it. I tried Iris, and yeah, I want to watch you do it, because
it's a bit confusing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen again. There we go. Okay, so they've since, basically, it used to be just a like a database of the different metrics, and IRIS Plus is this updated version of the website, where first of all, they have resources on the right-hand button. So for example, learn how to create a theory of change. That's not something that they used to have in the past, but it basically allows you to walk through the strategy and the theory of things, and then look at your metrics. So for example, and I know that they haven't completed all the SDGs yet, but let's, for example, pick gender, and we're going to look at financial services, thinking about that example that you shared, Fikri. So increasing gender equality through financial inclusion. Oh, please fill out this field. Sorry, guys, this is on the fly. FI, gender. Okay, let's see now. And so, for example, you can see what they have done as well is mapped out the metrics in relation to the 5 dimensions. What is the goal? who is affected, how much, what is the contribution and risk. And that's why I was saying, as a baseline, it's important for us as accelerators, but also the ventures that we support, to be aware of the impact management project, because it's become more common language. So for example, and basically the way this website is set up is that you can keep like refining things further, and save different views basically. So for the reason, not the reason, over here, the outcome that is spit out once we put in all our different selected criteria, it says the outcome that you would report is the percentage change in female clients reporting increased income. So the output being the number of female clients reporting an increase in outcome versus the outcome being the change. So basically from the base to when we again review the data. So it's a very simple example, but I hope that you can see that this is one tool that you can use to better understand your metrics. The other thing that I just wanted to show while we are here is if you go to the top button of menu, and then you can see all the IRIS metrics, basically. You can, again, filter it by SDG or by theme, or to look at a specific category. But basically everything here, from accounts payable to whatever the last category is all the different IRIS metrics. They also have a glossary, so you can see whether that makes sense. The one thing I should also mention is that these guys are very, very open to feedback, and they also have working groups around IRIS. And so if there's something that you went in and said, hey, that doesn't make sense, could we add it? You can always contribute to the conversation. But maybe just to come back to your original question, Fikri, do you encourage ventures to get very specific and look at certain standardized metrics? Sorry, just gonna close this. Or do you allow it to be more simple? So I would say, like, at a baseline, we should be getting our ventures to do a theory of change as part of their understanding of what they're looking to do. From that, if they start out with a basic mapping out of outputs and outcomes, not necessarily aligned to any standards, that's a great place to start, because we just want to get people to think about what they're doing, and then we can do some of the more granular mapping out to this specific SDG target or this specific outcome later. So as a baseline, keep it simple. I think as people are getting deeper, then we can point them in the direction of IRIS, or if you're a nonprofit, there are other standards that are available that you can look into. But that's not necessarily where I would start, just because, yeah, the goal is to like open your mind to see how this all works, and then you can start to get more granular, if that makes sense. I don't know, Abby, if you wanted to add anything, or Fikri, if you have any follow-up thoughts.
Nothing really to add. I would say that I agree in terms of what you've just said reflects what we've done here. Like, we've started with the theory of change and mapping out outputs and outcomes, both for ourselves and when we've done it with entrepreneurs in workshops, where, you know, for us, it might be signposting to the standards for anyone who we think it would be relevant for, but skipping it when it's not. So yeah, I would just agree that we haven't kind of needed to, or we haven't gone into the depth of like introducing people ourselves to the standards and going through it with them. If that's something that's relevant, then they would need to take it away, develop it themselves.
Yeah, thanks Abby for reiterating that. And Fikri, maybe just one thought for me is, another thought rather, is when we think about the the spectrum, right? So there's what entrepreneurs are doing on this side, and then there's the funders and investors. And sometimes, especially as companies get to be a little bit more mature or potentially get funded by a venture fund, especially, for example, if it's an impact venture fund, then the onus of being more aligned at a portfolio level. So an example here is that the fund that I used to work at previously would get all its companies to certify as a B Corp. And within that, to kind of have a portfolio approach of where everyone lies with respect to their impact score. Similarly, when it comes to mapping out outcomes, like everyone needs to align with the IRIS metrics, because again, just to have that more portfolio approach. So I think that's also something relevant that you could choose to do at an accelerator level, because if you wanted to be able to see your sort of cumulative impact, but also to see the streams of, let's say, cohort by cohort, what's going on, having a little bit more standardization might help. What tends to be the case, I think for most of us, is that when we do run a cohort, people are coming from different streams. So it's not like we can just, consolidate everyone's metrics into one clean sheet, but at least we can get them thinking about things in that way. But for now, I would definitely start with a good baseline of keeping it simple, mapping out theory of change, thinking about the 5 dimensions, doing some basic outputs and outcomes, and also thinking about how you're actually going to collect that data. And that's just as true for the ventures as it is for us. If we start out with a very complicated process, it's going to be, things are, going to drop off. So if we start simple, it just allows for us, to have a good foundation. Did you have something to add, Fikri?
I think really thank you. It's always when I'm consulting with you guys, it's becoming much more clearer, all of my concerns.
Pleasure.
And I think it's just because it's like your what you say about your experience, like when I meet these kind of creatures like Jane, Iris, and Sopak, they give me so much knowledge, but where to filter it, how to start it, and that's where this conversation is needed. And I think like the next question I want to ask, like, do you have a story about helping some kind of business, like from the start? They start with basic outcome, and have you have an experience that help some business who start from basic and try to go more in depth in their outcome, like any experience facilitating that kind of process?
Yeah, I actually have an additional question as well to you.
Yeah,
Abby, if you please, you already have the baseline, but I mean, how do you have a certain duration or frequency to review their theory of change, or they outcome the basic one and then try to facilitate them to getting more into depth into them, or not? I mean, if you can share your experience on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So maybe to answer Moon's question first on how frequently do we get in there and recycle or get the ventures to think more about it. I guess, it depends, and I always hate saying that, but it's true, right? So let's say we had a cohort that began in 2016 and the program is only 6 months. What we can do is to kind of, set up our impact timeline and the places where we would like to get data from them. But what we can't necessarily control is the fact that businesses change and things change, as well as, part of the answer to that question is how actively engaged are we with our alumni community? How aware are we of what's going on with them? So I think it depends on a number of factors. What tends to be the case, and what I've seen in a lot of cases is that we have, especially if we're working with very early stage businesses, it will be harder over time for us to know where they're going, because things change, businesses fail, people decide not to continue doing what they're doing. And so we would have less control on understanding what's going on. Like, we can ask for the information, but we may not always get it. When we work with more growth or later stage companies, as in the case of Spring, when we work with companies that are looking to raise investment, sometimes when they come in and they're part of a funding roundtable, especially the ones that are maybe not fully ready to raise money, but they're getting ready to raise money, we have a bit more space to work on the business model, on the impact model, and thus there's a chance for us to kind of monitor and see, well, this is what you thought before you started the program, this is what it is after, and this is what you're like 6 months after. So I think for me, the answer to that is it depends on the stage of the enterprise, as well as what the makeup of your cohort is. I think that one of the reasons why accelerators struggle with impact measurement and management is if we try to track all the data points for, let's say, we've been running for like 10 years, it would be very hard for us to go back and get information from people who did our first program, right? Because there's sort of natural attrition in how people share data. So I would say it would be a good idea to, especially for the early stage companies, is to get them to that basic level. If you're able to keep working with them over time through a strong alumni process and community engagement work, then you can continue to support them in that journey, but also be aware that that may be harder because things change and businesses change, etc. So I know that I'm going to stop there and see whether you have any follow-up thoughts, Moon.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, because that was exactly what we were facing right now, because we kind of lost in touch with our first alumni.
Yeah.
And by then, I mean, our knowledge in impact measurement and impact management are not really sufficient yet to do some sort of reporting and gathering data and such. So yeah, that's why I've been we should strengthen our alumni network, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's also about being realistic and transparent. I think that's the big thing, is that when we are doing any kind of impact reporting, whether it's something internal or whether it's with funders or a report that's out there, we should just be transparent that, hey, we've had 700 cohort members. This data that we're sharing on increased entrepreneurial mindset, it only relates to a third, because those are the ones who answered the survey information. That's fine, because everyone knows that getting folks to answer questions, there's a lot of different factors. Just be clear about that. So even with the small subset of companies or entrepreneurs that you're working with, if you have, just, this is what it is, this is the information we have, and then of course look to strengthen how you would keep them connected. I think, Abby, the last time you had mentioned that in order to be part of the alumni network, you guys ask the ventures to take that 10 minutes, 15 minutes to do the survey. So provide an incentive to be in the community, but ask them to say, hey, no, this is something that we need from you. So there's different tips, I think, that you can do to increase engagement and thus hopefully get more data. But I won't belittle that it is a challenge.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shanna.
And then Fikri, your question was an example of a venture that started very basic and then helped to elevate. So this is an example that comes to mind, and this entrepreneur, actually, I think we may have talked about her and her business in the past. It's a zero waste grocery in Vancouver. And the founder had been through a pre-incubation program at Spring, which basically was an 8-week session. And it was very much about, is my idea any good? Am I ready to be an entrepreneur? So it's like part business, part personal training as part of that program. And so in that session, we didn't necessarily dig as deep into like, what are your impact metrics? Because it's really just helping the founder understand how, is this even a business, right? Subsequent to that, this founder went to a different program within the Vancouver ecosystem, and that program was now focused more on helping to take things to the next stage. So after she went through the program at Spring, the outcome for her was that, hey, this is actually something that I want to do, and an MVP of this, because that's the tangible output of that program, is that I'm going to start a pop-up shop. So within Patagonia, which is a sustainable clothing store, she would set up a pop-up shop for a zero waste grocery. I think it was every Friday and Saturday. And so for, I think, a good 18 months, her focus was just on building community, getting the word out, having enough to really like get her business off the ground, basically. So by the time she was in the second program, there was a good, decent monthly revenue coming from the pop-up shops. But all the time, the big plan is to open a store. So in the second program, she got to spend some time on developing her impact logic further, because it was no longer just an idea on a napkin. This was like a real thing, right? So how, how am I gonna actually build a logic framework around this, and really sort of getting deep. And then the other thing they did in that was also made everyone do the B impact assessment as a way to set, again, a baseline for how impactful their business models were. And then by the time the founder came back to Spring, it was to raise money for her business. And at that time, she was kind of gearing up to raise money. And it gave us an opportunity to, first of all, see this person who came to us first with just an idea, went off, got her MVP off the ground, working towards setting up the store, and now thinking about raising money for the store, and thus a chance to see how the business model had developed and how her overall theory of change was still very consistent. It's about waste reduction, but maybe the activities over time have changed. So I hope that kind of illustrates to some extent that yes, you can have enterprises that you work with at a very early stage just to help them get off the ground, to get them thinking about these things. If you have the opportunity to continue supporting them through that journey, you can help them get deeper, whether it is using tools like the B impact assessment, whether it's sitting down with them and supporting them through their deeper theory of change analysis, all the way to actually setting up a impact framework in place. And if I'm not mistaken, when we produced our impact report as Spring in 2018, hers was one of the businesses we featured in the report.
I've read the impact report in 2018. Like, it's the business name is Inada, right? Isn't it?
Inada, exactly. Exactly. And so even in there, her metrics are listed because they haven't necessarily shifted too much. I think what tends to be the case, at least from my experience, is that we start out with a few outcomes, and then as our business develops and we get, we refine things further, we get deeper, the system we have in place to collect that information becomes better. Then also the range of what we're able to talk about becomes wider, but it's all about starting simple. So yeah, Fikri, that's a good example for me of someone who you can support from a very early stage all the way to today, where Nada has exceeded every possible revenue target they're doing really, really well. So if anything, those metrics are just bigger and deeper today than what she originally thought.
So like they join the program, like correct me if I'm wrong, like when they first join you, they haven't even launched their product yet?
No, not even launched the product.
Okay. Oh, so like when at the first program they launched their MVP.
Yes.
All right.
It basically, going through the program helped her solidify that she had an MVP. And the MVP was the pop-up shop. Yeah.
Okay. So after that, after they launched their MVP, like they become like the alumni. So like you support them through alumni program.
Yes.
Like,
and the one thing about I'm not sure about your individual ecosystems, but in Vancouver at the time, and continues to be the case, there's a lot of collaboration between the different entities on the ground. So as I mentioned, she went from one program to another, came back to us, then was part of something else. And so we all kind of, and we've talked about this in our first session and others, this element of contribution versus attribution. So in some ways, each of the ecosystem intermediaries, including Spring, have contributed to that success story that is Nada, but we would not attribute everything to Spring, right? Because there were all these different enabling factors. So for example, when I talked about investment and funding raised, that is something especially related to a specific amount of money that the founder was able to raise. We can say, yes, this was a big part came from being in our program and through access to our network, because when we ask the questions around how much money did you raise, and again, like, because she's an alumni, we have a really good relationship with this person. You can get that information on like who the investors are, and you can know that, yes, this came from an introduction, etc. So I think the message is that having, especially with alumni, having those, that personal connection, but also having them integrated in your community in different ways can be a really helpful way for you to keep track of what they're doing and to continue supporting them. And continuing to support them doesn't only mean through a program, but maybe just through pointing them in the direction of a relevant event. Or let's say you have an investor delegation coming to town and saying, hey, maybe this makes sense for you to attend to. So finding different ways to keep them connected can, ultimately they see the full value in you supporting them, and thus, answering a survey every year, it's okay, because it's a small bit of their time for the connection and the support that they continue to get from you.
all right. Yeah, that's I finally get the full story, because when I read the impact report from Spring, I becoming more curious, Yeah.
Of course. No, my pleasure. Do any of the three of you have any other questions?
I have one question that was kind of sparked by something you said earlier in the conversation.
Yeah.
When you were talking about impact investors sort of having, you know, they will have like a portfolio of organizations and probably relatively complex ways of getting them to measure their impact so that they can understand it across their portfolio. But with us, like, we obviously don't need something this complex, but I think we do want to start being able to say something about the impact that the businesses we work with are having. So even like as simple as, okay, how many people are reached? What's the depth of that that reach? I wondered if you had done anything similar, or you'd seen people who'd done something similar where it's like understanding the impact of across the businesses, but in a very light touch way that would be a good kind of first step for us to be implementing that before making it any more complex. Or
no, it's a good question, and it's definitely something that even we find challenging, because of course, like, it's one thing to amalgamate our own impact, but then to bring it up to what our ventures are doing, and it's something that we're continuing to see how to refine. What I've seen people do on one hand is to kind of look at job creation as a way to talk about the impact that the ventures are having, and not just like an output of job creation, but like an increased employment over periods of time, because again, there's attrition in jobs. Also, revenue growth sometimes is an indicator, because that's showing the improved, not necessarily livelihood, but the improved reach of the businesses. And so kind of amalgamating that. One of the ideas that I've thought could be useful to like answer some of this is to think about what are maybe one to three basic metrics you could get all your ventures to answer, and then be able to like just consolidate that. And I think that especially if you're working with slightly growth stage businesses, the revenue one could be good. Jobs could be helpful. I've also seen people try to do livelihoods impacted in terms of thinking about beneficiaries, and then try and consolidate that. So those are the ones that come to mind. So what we've done is, again, been a little bit more at the higher level and talked about the SDGs that the companies that we support are working on, and then you can end up with this nice visual to show that in each SDG, companies are working on at least two to three of the 17. You could, again, continue to get granular, but that might be a good place to start, Avi, is to think about what are one or two things that you could get all ventures to track. And then even if it meant that you do that on an annual basis, that could be a better way to show the cross-cutting sort of impact that everyone is having. And that's why I think people gravitate towards jobs and revenue growth, because that's what, you know, we're in the business of growing and of employing more people and affecting more beneficiaries. So that's what I've seen.
And with the, that makes a lot of sense. With the livelihoods impacted one, two questions. So one, what exactly are you asking people to report? Would it be like the number of customers, or it's them kind of estimating how many people they think have been reached? Because it might be different number of customers.
Totally. It's a good question. And what I have seen is mostly people talking about beneficiaries reached. And so let's say, and I think sometimes it's easier with, let's take our example of the childhood diabetes. If we can continue to track, let's say, the number of kids who have been able to either receive diabetes education or actual health solutions, then we can say over time that this is the number of beneficiaries and thus lives affected. That's probably what I've seen more commonly, but not necessarily engagement. because it's one thing, and this is one of the critiques, I think, of, let's say, the financial services space, where a goal is to increase access of women to financial services. And it's like, okay, now 50%, there's a 50% increase in the number of women who have access to a bank account. That doesn't mean that they're actually using it. And so we need to, that stuff needs to keep being refined, but usually I see more of the reach and the number, not necessarily the level of engagement or the effectiveness, but that's where the sectors are moving.
That was kind of my second question, in terms of, are there any simple ways of measuring kind of the depth of that impact as well as just the breadth?
Yeah.
So like a question like, if you were to say, okay, report how many beneficiaries, you say 100, and then rate, on a scale of 1 to 5, the depth of impact on average, and you could say like 1 means this and 5 means this sort of thing. Is that a weird way to...
No, I mean, I think I've seen that. So you're absolutely right that you could say that, hey, we are looking at these 100 beneficiaries and 85% of them say that this experience has been transformative. You absolutely see that. And I think one of the impact reports that's, as an example in the deck, does have that. But what I've also seen is kind of doing relative comparisons. So for example, if we go back to this childhood diabetes, as a proportion. So the proportion of kids with diabetes served divided by the number of, let's say, an underserved community. So really trying to put a point on, okay, so there's 100 kids that we've looked at, but how many is that relative to the size of this particular rural, poor, underserved community? So trying to get either more geographic or more granular, and then that can say, hey, so we think that we are, that's about 25%, versus the whole population, which would be, much higher. So our goal with this venture is to support them to increase that 25% to maybe 50%. And then that's where we can, start to see more change. So I've seen, to your point, the scale way of talking about it, or a percentage way, or to do more of a proportion that's grounded in either region or geography, or just a more specific indicator to show the extent of the change.
So everyone's kind of, the community that they're trying to impact would be unique. So that it could be all different sizes, but it's more about the percentage that they have on it and seeing how that changes over time.
Over time, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I'd never thought of that kind of way of doing it.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that on this regard, like that's where the depth in our space needs to keep happening. But you guys are asking all the right questions, right? Like, how do we do this? What's relevant? How do we get started? How do we push people along the spectrum? And having that conversation is what's going to keep helping us, mature the space. So
I have a similar question in terms of kind of testing you on how to do things. But another thing that came up so yesterday when we had the workshop and we were thinking about, okay, well, what are the things that for us are very important but very difficult to monitor? And one of them was about like community and networks. Yeah. Like, because a big value that we would say that we offer people, entrepreneurs, is like making connections for them, or it's kind of building this strong ecosystem that has strength in numbers and strength in like the depth of those connections and things like that. Yeah. How do you at Spring measure that at all? Is it possible?
Yeah, so we and I've seen other examples where people talk about community engagement on a few levels. So one is by just talking about reach, so like social media reach on different platforms, or just the number of members in our community. What we do is we also try and divide that community into the different types of stakeholders. So whether it's a mentor, investor, partner, and so kind of have a sense of what's happening with the different stakeholders. Right now, when it comes to engagement, I would say we are also at a higher level at Spring, where it's more number of engagement. We do track introductions that we make as well, so that for us, in some ways, that's a way to report back to those different stakeholders. Hey, so we had this program, or these 4 programs run this year, and let's say it's our banking partner. It's a way for us to report back to them that, first of all, thank you for your continued partnership. As part of that, these are the 15 introductions that we made to you for your services. 10 of them ended up being clients. So it kind of shows them the monetary value of what's being created. And that for us is a way that we understand the engagement a little bit more. But when we talk
is that specifically for like connections to that funder? Or you mean like if a company funds a program, you would track like, okay, for this entrepreneur, I introduced them to like 4 people, and you track all of those connections?
A little bit of both. So it's like sometimes for that specific, because the thing is that we have strategic partners that include financial institutions, law firms, and other types of ecosystem partners that are, they're supporting our work to support the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem, but they also need to see the business value in doing that. So it's helpful, and that's why we do this on a semi-annual basis, where we share with them what's been going on in the community. We also give them the opportunity to participate in events. We bring them on as speakers. One of the things that for us was also successful is giving the staff, their staff, so let's say at this accounting firm is a good example, giving their a little bit more junior staff the opportunity to participate in some of the workshops as a way to kind of just be around entrepreneurship, which is not necessarily something that they get to do. But do we really quantify the value of that engagement? We're not quite there yet. At Spring, we also have a new community person who just came on board, I think now it's 2 months ago. And part of her remit and goal is to really get deeper on that for us. But for the most part, I've just seen people talk about, we have this many followers, or, you know, this is the extent of it. So for us, yes, it's having those introductions, but then also, Abby, your question around, do we track how many connections we make for a specific founder? Because especially for the funding programs, that's relevant. We try and keep good track of that, yes. And of course, not all those connections will yield in the entrepreneur being funded, but yes, we do try to keep track. And this is where having a robust CRM system is really helpful, because then you can just kind of see like what's been done, and you can track things a lot more easily, as opposed to putting a search button in your email and checking, right? So that's what we do.
Cool. Any kind of, we're trying to think of sort of other creative ideas of how to measure things like community beyond reach, I guess. But yeah, just something I haven't managed to come up with any good ideas for yet.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think, like I said, I haven't seen too much. But we'll put an ask out there to the group in case. One thing, actually, this is a good reminder. Steph from Second Muse had shared, and I'll put that in my update email after this. She had put this cool link the other day in the Slack channel about the video storytelling for impact, and I wonder if things like that would be more effective, because the thing with like community engagement, etc., is it's not as tangible. But if you're able to speak about the depth of engagement through a different medium, such as video, and I think that you know, can be so powerful. that could be something to consider. And yeah, it's in, I think she posted it in the tools channel of the Slack group. And in general, I think, you know, even for us, when we did that, when we did our impact report last year, those little spotlights on the founders, that's where we started to talk more about depth of impact, but also through their responses, you could see like some of the deeper value and impact that they've seen going through the programs is from those connections. And that's not something that we can, you know, highlight any other way than through a story. So sometimes that's the most effective.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions, Moon or Fikri?
Or do we still have need to continue to the slide?
Yeah, I just, the only, so I'll share this with everyone. All I did with this deck is that, and maybe I'll take just a couple of minutes to synthesize and then we can have some more open space. But basically, I just wanted to recap our journey together. And this began in Singapore, where it was clear that we were going to be supporting all of the organizations on a bespoke basis. So either one-on-one or a few organizations and one cohort org. But what also became clear was that there were a few kind of cross-cutting themes, such as financial sustainability or replicating models, that were going to be more thematic. And so with the impact theme, it was purposefully broken down into venture level and org level, because as we've talked about, impact is very multifaceted. And our goal and our theme has been to, first of all, to understand your where you're at, your challenges, what you are looking to achieve. We also kicked off with a conversation around what ourselves, Akina Foundation, and I think Abby also had shared in the beginning what her experience and what our collective experiences have been like trying to do this for our organizations. We then had some great speakers from Global Accelerator Learning Initiative, Abigail Davidson. So she talked us through the Value for Money tool, which is a fantastic tool and template for us to dig into and really understand the value of what we're doing at a program level. We then had someone from B-Lab and the Impact Management Project. We also worked through our organizational theory of change. People came in at different levels. People took things to a different depth, and have really kind of done the work in refining things, going through the indicators, asking some really good questions. And one of the core goals of this Accelerator impact theme has been to really give everyone a solid foundation with which to create or improve your impact measurement and management framework. And then as you go through the deck, you'll see that just illustrative, I put like what is the timeline usually for how we collect information. It's just an illustrative one. But I think what might be interesting for everyone to look at when you get the slide is, I just wanted to share with you, and Fikri, to your point, how different the impact reports can look like. And so we have an example of SeedSpot in the US, which talks about revenue, the lives impacted, jobs created, and then again, if you go and look at the impact report, maybe I'll keep them open so that you guys can see how different everything looks. They also kind of line up with the Sustainable Development Goals, and then you can download the report here to get some more information. And then I looked at one that I found from an organization in Singapore, which similarly talks about the fact that 90% of their startups are still going strong. Again, revenue growth, investment growth. This is their version of their impact report, talking about, you know, the types of programs they run, etc. But again, very different from the Seed Spot one. And then finally, I put the Reach for Change report. And this is an org that I find really fascinating because they focus on kids. 1 second. And Abby, to your point, this is one that uses that sort of scale approach to say how many, so 74% of the social entrepreneurs think that the program and Reach for Change really contributed to their organization's credibility, or 67% of them felt it allowed them to overcome their challenges. And so just three different approaches to what their impact report looks like, and just to kind of share with you how, you know, how there are different ways. And then just as a final sort of resource tab, a reminder that in the project theme we have lots of resources. I'm going to do some digging, Abby, for you and see if we can find anything more on the community side of things. I think it's a question that people are asking more and more, and we'll see if there's something there that we can share. But yeah, basically, that's all that's in that deck. It's just a review of everything that we've done, just some examples to leave you with, a place for resources, and we have about 5 minutes left, so any other questions you have we can go through, but just know that with today being the final sort of session for us together, of course, like, we're available on Slack and email, so keep your questions coming. It doesn't have to be only until, you know, the end of September, whenever FI is done, but as they come, feel free. I mean, and it would be really exciting to see how many of you go on to produce an impact report, or talk more, get deeper on your impact framework. And that's, if we get to that point at some point this year, that would be fantastic to see. So that's all the talking from me. But yeah, any other questions or comments?
I didn't have any other questions for today, but just, yeah, of course, like, a huge thank you. I think this workshop, this series has been really valuable for us, and for me in particular. And it's also great to, like, not just speak directly with you guys, but have, like, other people on the call and hear their questions and get their input. I think the way it's been structured has really allowed that, and it's good just to even listen in on other people's challenges and questions. So yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
It's been great to have you, Abby, and it also, like, share, like, your experience. I think to your point, you know, and thinking also about the ventures that we support, like, a lot of, there's content, but the real sort of learning comes from connection and meeting people. And I think for me, it's been just so fantastic, even getting to know you guys virtually. Like, I feel I know you more now than and we didn't even meet in Singapore. So I think that's definitely valuable. Fikri, Moon, any other comments from you guys?
I think this is the last. Have you ever encountered, like, facilitating some people who maybe have already a background in social organization, like an NGO or foundation, and they actually doesn't quite have a strong business foundation. Like, maybe they get money from donation or doing some kind of semi-business stuff, but it's not quite sustainable. But they have the advantage of understanding the depth of their impact.
Yeah.
Maybe because they have done it for like 5 years. And, like, I think, like, this is in example in Indonesia. There's so many organization that help kids. I think kids in rural area to at least get some basic school education. And like when I talk to them, like they are very they're like the master to understand the community in the area, like who to talk to, who's the who's the boss around around the community, and like what the community really wants, what the community really needs. Like if they want to create an impact report, maybe they have like a very in-depth outcome.
Yeah.
But in terms of business, yeah, it's maybe it's a little bit shaky. So like,
Yeah.
do you have any encounter of facilitating that kind of organization?
So under Spring, no, because for the most part, we work with for-profit enterprises. We have worked with a few nonprofits, but that's like maybe 5% of all the participants that we've had. At the same time, when we have worked with some of those nonprofit organizations, so for example, we supported one of the, and more than one, I should say, some of the local foundations in Vancouver for setting up, let's say, a hackathon, or for running a basic sort of entrepreneurship workshop. And right now we're in the midst of running or working towards some new programs that are specifically with such types of entities that don't come from a business background, but to your point, have been working very deeply in their space or in their sector, and they're experts at it. And where we find the magic between us is that they're looking to us to help them understand more about the business context and to help them either to spin out a social enterprise or to think about ways to diversify their revenue sources. And it allows us also to understand the space and sector that they come from. So and maybe that's more relevant in our context, but so far, while it's a small piece of what we do, any interactions that we have been good and positive, because they generally come with an open mind, and they come because they're looking to grow the business, get into new areas. And so, yeah, we've had a positive experience. Did you have a specific challenge that you face when delivering a session, or? Yeah.
I think it's like a dilemma for us, like we are currently running a boot camp in outside Jakarta, which Jakarta is more like advanced in knowledge in business.
Yeah.
Well, outside Jakarta, like we say in the example, we do the boot camp in Central Java, specifically a city called Solo.
Yeah.
Many of them have that kind of characteristic, the social background. They've done it for 10 years. There's some kind of participant who've done that. They help rural, it's not rural, marginal women who live on the street and kids on the street. They've done it for 10 years. But in terms of business, it's like if I can say in my perspective, they say if it is enough for them to eat, it's enough, and they just done it kind of in that pace, And our dilemma is like, do we try to get them in terms of our pace as a business, or just let them be a social organization that maybe could get in the part of being the deeper understanding for the community. So like like you say, divide the role. I don't know.
I mean, I think it kind of depends on their openness. What I find is that if we try, because that's the thing, like about any program, right? Like the way that a successful way to set up and start a new program is to really understand the needs of the organization. And so we can't, even so, for example, when it came to everything FI related, there was a call with each cohort member to understand, okay, where are you starting from? What are your needs and what are you looking to achieve? And then based on that, we would design the content and the delivery of the support. If we just kind of go and say, hey, you know, nonprofit, you need to learn these 10 things, it won't necessarily have the same impact because we're not starting off, we're not co-creating this. So from my perspective, it's important to understand what's important to them and then to build based on what's important to them. As part of understanding what they need and what their goals are, we can also provide them with some knowledge about, hey, so you're thinking about this, have you thought about doing it this way? So there is a way to kind of share some of our knowledge, but it does have to be something that's co-created, because, you know, to your point, like if they've been doing something for 5 or 10 years, they're also kind of in their own mindset, and, you know, there's a lot of resources and articles out there about the nonprofit way of doing things. And so that's part of a bigger debate. But if we just zone in on program delivery and how much you know, how to set it up in the right way, I think from my perspective, what works really well is this sense of co-creation, a really strong needs assessment, and then building something that's going to work for both of you, because then you can ultimately have the impact that you're both looking to have.
Yeah, I think that's the keyword. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, no worries.
Co-creation.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
All right.
thank you both so much for being on the line.
Yeah.
And
For the closing, like, yeah, we are. I'm trying to opening the video.
Thank
want to
you
say
so
good.
much, Sana.
yeah, no, it's a pleasure. It's so nice to, you're sitting together. It's nice to see you both. And of course, please feel free to reach out with any other questions. And yeah, looking forward to seeing how things evolve for you guys.
I personally really appreciate all the facilitating and the knowledge sharing that we've done over the few months, and definitely very keen to apply it. Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your day, and I will send the deck and the recording once it's ready.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody. And thanks to Clemmy and Nicola, who are not on, but thank you for your support as well during the entire theme, and to everybody who couldn't join. Appreciate your time, and yeah, we'll talk soon. Bye.